Ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei, the police need your help. Who's the man in high vis and the woman in a white dress seen leaving the Christchurch park where a man was brutally stabbed? The lead detective is live. The South Auckland school banning cell phones to stop bullying and improve student results. A Ukrainian war orphan so hungry he ate his own soft toys finds a new family. The potentially game-changing temporary contraceptive for men, and Shrimply the best. It's a wasteland of eyeballs and whiskers as savvy shoppers scoop up a seafood bargain. We'll have the details. You can watch us live, Sky Channel 83, Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie, kia ora, I'm Evie Ashton. The government says its proposed new resource management system will save users $10 billion over 30 years. The Resource Management Act is a step closer to being repealed. Two bills set to replace it were introduced to Parliament this afternoon. Environment Minister David Parker says more projects will be able to go ahead without a resource consent, saving millions of dollars.
Developers, infrastructure providers and businesses will see the biggest cost saving, and their benefits will flow through to the public through cost savings for housing and fewer consents.
Government estimates show costs for users could fall by 19% a year. Both National and ACT have already expressed scepticism about the vaunted improvements. The police investigating the brutal stabbing of a dog walker in Christchurch want to speak to two people seen leaving the area in a small white car. The man who was attacked remains in a critical condition in hospital. Jean Edwards reports.
The police say a man and a woman were seen leaving Bexley Reserve near the Pages Road entrance in the car shortly after 5 o'clock yesterday morning. The man, believed to be in his 20s, was wearing an orange high-vis top, hat and shorts, while the woman was in a long white dress. They're possibly of Māori or Pacifica descent. The police say the pair might be able to help investigators working on the case. They say there are people with information about the stabbing who are yet to come forward, and they're urging them to do the right thing.
The Court of Appeal has reserved its decision on Malcolm Rewa's bid for a fourth trial over his conviction in 2019 for murdering Susan Burdett. Teina Pora had earlier spent 20 years in prison for the crime before his conviction was quashed in 2015. Soumya Bamiripati was at the hearing in Wellington today.
Rewa's lawyer, Mark Ryan, says his client didn't get a fair trial. He says a witness who was in a sexual relationship with Miss Burdett had the motive to kill her, but wouldn't answer the defence's questions. He says Rewa's former counsel didn't do his job properly and made statements not based on evidence. But prosecutors say the jury already knew about the relationship, and the defence's argument, while unusual, still made sense. The court will release its decision in writing.
The Mayor of Auckland says he's disappointed the government rejected a proposal for an alternate Three Waters plan. Last month, Wayne Brown and his Christchurch and Waimakariri counterparts, Phil Major and Dan Gordon, proposed a plan involving local ownership of water assets. But on Friday, the local government minister, Nanaia Mahuta, said the fundamentals of the government's reform would remain relatively unchanged. Today, Mr Brown said the government is yet to answer his questions about the existing legislation. He says he's seen no numbers supporting the Prime Minister's claim that waiting to put the legislation through would drive Aucklanders' water charges up by 7%. The Independent Police Conduct Authority says victims of fraud are losing trust in the police to take the crime seriously. The authority has found major failings in the way the police are responding to the growing number of fraud complaints and is calling for a fundamental overhaul of police processes. Its chair, Colin Doherty, says the police need to step up.
Many people thinking that it's not worth complaining about. Some people are embarrassed at being scammed or a whole host of reasons, but we think one of those is that people are of the view that complaining to the police doesn't help or doesn't bring appropriate action.
The police say they accept they need to do more. In sport, Black Caps coach Gary Stead isn't ruling out selecting Trent Boult and Martin Guptill for next year's One-Day World Cup, but says the squad to play India has been picked with that tournament in mind. Both players have both been left out of the upcoming T20 and One-Day series. Guptill's been usurped by Finn Allen, who played all of the games at the recent T20 World Cup. Stead, however, is defending the decision to omit Boult, who opted out of his national contract, and pick all-rounder Jimmy Neesham, who turned down a national contract.
When we were at the time of contracting last year, Jimmy wasn't offered a New Zealand or a domestic contract, then went and got some other deals, and so when he was offered a contract, he chose to turn that down.
Kiwi Ferns coach Ricky Henry is bullish about his side's chances of success against Australia in Sunday morning's Rugby League World Cup final. They beat England 20-6 in York in this morning's semi-final, while Australia trounced Papua New Guinea 82-0. New Zealand narrowly lost 10-8 to Australia in pool play, but Henry believes they can reverse the result with a few tweaks.
We've got to be better with our completions and our errors, so we'll try and take it to them and get real physical with them as well.
And the shirts worn by the Netherlands during the upcoming Football World Cup will be auctioned to support migrant workers in Qatar. The Dutch are one of the few associations to have criticised human rights and working conditions in Qatar. That's the news.
The Transport Agency calls for reduced speed limits.
320 people lose their lives in our roads, and every one of those deaths is a tragedy.
The National Party responds.
Effectively, this is going to slow New Zealanders down, make it harder to get around. And actually, I'm not sure whether that's actually the number one priority when it comes to our roads.
And listeners chime in.
It won't be fun. My motorbike does 80 in first gear, but worth the sacrifice.
All sides of the story. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Isolated thunderstorms in western Northland tomorrow afternoon and evening. Waikato to Manawatu, also Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and the Central High Country. Partly cloudy with a few afternoon and evening showers, mainly inland. Some heavy with isolated thunderstorms tomorrow. From Horowhenua to Wellington and for Wairarapa. Fine, however, isolated showers about the ranges today, spreading to Wairarapa tomorrow with possible thunderstorms. Nelson, Marlborough, Bulla, Westland, also for Canterbury north of Timaru. Fine today, apart from a few showers in southern Westland, increasing high cloud tomorrow with a few showers about the ranges. For southern Canterbury, Otago and Southland. High cloud increasing this afternoon and occasional rain developing. Rain could be briefly heavy tomorrow afternoon or evening. Fiordland, occasional rain, mainly about the fjords today, and Te Kohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy, rain at times. The time has just gone 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines and any traffic news for you at 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Police are trying to identify a couple seen near Bexley Park around the time a man walking his dog was repeatedly stabbed. The man's family found him conscious but critically wounded at the Christchurch Park yesterday morning after the dog returned to the house without him, prompting them to go searching. The man and his dog set off at around 4:45am for their walk. Yesterday, police asked anyone with CCTV or dash cam from the area from about 4am onwards to check their footage. Well, joining us now is Detective Inspector Nicola Reeves. Kia ora, Detective.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Tell us about this couple.
Yep, so we've got a couple who are in reasonable close proximity to the gates of the Bexley Reserve. They've got quite good line of sight. They happen to be awake at this particular time of the morning, and they have described hearing what they've called raised voices, sounding like an argument. They have looked in that direction, and they have seen a man assaulting our victim. That has taken place all of about a minute or so, and then the man, and he's being accompanied by a woman, and they have got in a what's been described as a small white car, and they have left on Pages Road.
So, Detective, to be clear, in your press statement, you describe a man who's wearing a high-vis top, a hat and shorts. Is this the man who is allegedly assaulting the victim?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And is it possible in the footage to see a weapon?
No, this is not. This is not footage. This is eyewitnesses who have got a good line of sight, good view of this location, who can see this happening. Obviously, the time of the morning, it is a little bit dark, but there is lighting around the entrance to the reserve. There's regular street lighting. It looks to them like a bit of a fight. They can't see a weapon.
Okay. Can you please describe the woman and what she's wearing?
So she is described as possibly being of Māori or Pacifica descent. She's described as a solid build, around 176 centimetres, which is about 5'8", with long dark hair. But distinctively for her is that she's wearing a long white dress or long white clothing.
And the car, what more do you know about the car? Do you have a licence plate number?
The car at this stage is only described as a small white vehicle. I've got nothing in terms of a registration from our witnesses.
You were appealing for CCTV footage or dash cam. Have you had any luck with those requests?
Yes, we've continued today with our area inquiries, moving around the Bexley Reserve and the streets nearby, and we're still collecting CCTV footage from where we can. And like I said yesterday, it takes a bit of time to get through it, but if I can take a moment to actually thank the residents around this area, they've all been incredibly cooperative and have been really helpful with letting us have access to their personal CCTV footage where they have it.
The eyewitness, what do they tell you about what the victim was doing? Did he intervene to try and help in an altercation?
It's not quite as clear as that, Lisa. It's more that they've heard raised voices, which is what's drawn their attention, and they've looked over and seen one man, who is our suspect, assaulting another man who is our victim.
Did they call the police before you put the call out for help? Did they report the incident?
Yes, they did. They were not actually... They weren't quite sure of kind of the seriousness of what they were watching, but they did call police very early on.
And do you know whether police responded to that call and went to the park?
Oh, no, sorry, they didn't call police at the time to the incident. Yep, they've contacted the police at a later date to say, hey, we saw this.
What would you say to that couple right now?
I would say thanks so much for coming forward and cooperating with us and giving us a really full account. It's great. This is what will actually change this case, and I'm quite certain that those people involved, like they've obviously walked away from that or driven away from that now, they'll know now how serious this assault is and the condition that our victim is in. And I'm certain that they will have spoken to friends, to family. They'll be seeking advice, what to do, they'll be nervous. And so someone out there will actually know who these people are. And we're encouraging those people, please, to contact us. Tell us who we need to be speaking to. They can do that anonymously if that's how they'd like to report to us.
The man and the woman you are looking for, the woman in the white dress, the man in the high vis, you have an opportunity to speak directly to them now, Detective. What do you say to them?
What I would say to them is that I think this is a situation that probably nobody actually intended to result like this. It's got a bit out of hand, but now is the time to actually come forward, talk to us, tell us what's happened, and we can get this matter resolved as quickly as possible. And bearing in mind, there's a family who has a bedside vigil around our victim up there, who are just, hoping that he is going to recover from what's happened. So I guess if they take a moment to think about the victim and his family, and, now's the time to do the right thing, come and speak to us.
Thank you again for your time, Detective. That is Detective Inspector Nicola Reeves there. It is almost 14 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The cost of living crisis and soaring food prices has seen people flock to a South Auckland supermarket offering special deals for the week. Pack and Save Manukau store is celebrating its 29th anniversary with deals on veggies, meat and other grocery items. But as food prices accelerate, a community leader says supermarkets could be doing more to keep prices consistently low. Our reporter Tom Taylor and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
$2.58 for that many chicken legs. That's a good price.
Shoppers keen for the deals at Pack and Save Manukau's 29th birthday celebrations today. And while food costs continue to rise across the board, the South Auckland store's keeping the specials flowing all week. With broccoli heads at 75 cents, fresh prawns $11.99 a kg, and chicken drumsticks $1.93 a kg, customers are emptying the shelves as fast as staff members can fill them up.
We've just been inside Pack and Save Manukau to check out their 29th birthday sales. This is what $20 can get you in store. 2 big bottles of Coke, 3 punnets of strawberries, a tray of chicken, some table spread and an assortment of veggies. We talked with some other shoppers to get their take on the big savings.
And the drumsticks were only, $3.20 for like 13 drumsticks. Score. Yeah. 4 packets. so that's probably $6.99 normally a kg. So I reckon there's $5 a packet there. I reckon there's $30 savings just on the chicken alone.
Veggies since COVID the prices have gone way up, and I got some veggies for like 75 cents, 95 cents, broccoli, kumaras and stuff.
Shoppers were queuing for the cheapest items like capsicums for 93 cents, avocados for 69 cents, and 3 punnets of strawberries for $5. Pack and Save's imposed quantity limits on some products, and many customers are filling their trolleys right up to this threshold.
There's a line for the chicken, but it's quite busy in there. Lots of people inside.
Where they had the shrimps in that, all you could see in the ice tray was just the eyeballs and the whiskers of the shrimp. There was no shrimp.
With the cost of living on the rise, shoppers are saying every dollar counts, with some travelling long distances for the cheaper goods.
I'm from Pukekohe, so I just came today to do my little bit of shopping over here.
Well, I've actually just come back from Australia after being over there for 18 years, and I tell you, the price has just been shocking. I don't even know how people can survive in New Zealand.
Manukau Ward Councillor Lotu Fuli joined us at the store after finally securing a parking spot in the packed car park. She says while it's nice to see food prices dropping temporarily, people are struggling all year round.
We've got the highest price rises in 14 years, but also highest profits for our supermarkets, crazy profits, making over $1 million a day in excess profits. So those two things don't seem to match up with the fact that people are struggling, and although wages have increased somewhat, they haven't increased to the same rate.
Ms. Fuli says for many people in South Auckland, it's a choice between food, petrol, electricity or rent. She says to help drive food costs down, Kiwis need more competition between supermarkets and an end to the duopoly of foodstuffs and Countdown. She says although Costco's now opened in West Auckland and the Warehouse is planning to expand its grocery range, breaking down the duopoly will take some time. For now, she's got a message for the two main players.
Have a heart for our people to think about, your customers, which are our people, and to do a little bit more in that social responsibility space in providing more regular discounts, and just bring your prices down generally across the board so that you might get, $800,000 in profit a day rather than $1 million in profit a day.
This shopper agrees.
I'd like to see this every week. How it was before COVID. It's great.
And in a statement, Foodstuff says all Pack and Save stores are proudly locally owned and operated, and each store has the ability to set extra promotions tailored to the needs of their locality. If you were listening to that one on radio, you can see the video version of the story from Nick and Tom. Ashburton College is largely banning cell phones at school from next year in a bid to combat bullying and improve student outcomes. The Board of Trustees made the decision after 12 months of research into the impact of mobile hairstyles on campus and following allegations of bullying, including online. Joining us now is Ashburton College Principal Ross Priest. Kia ora, Ross.
Kia ora. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Talk us through the background. What's behind the ban?
Okay, so, we're talking about managing rather than banning, but that's semantics. The key thing for us is it's been on our radar for 18 months. It certainly hasn't been a rush decision. Our Board of Trustees looked at it terms 3 and 4 last year, and basically there are 3 drivers behind it. Firstly, we know how addictive and distracting cell phones can be, particularly for young people. I mean, you've only got to go out and look at adults in a restaurant. How many of them can't leave their phones alone? And so if you're asking 13 and 14-year-olds not to be distracted by phones, that's a big ask. And we're finding that it is distracting from their learning. The second thing is really around that social interaction. I mean, outside my office, we have a group of chairs, and it's not uncommon to have half a dozen kiddies sitting around at lunchtime. None of them are talking to each other. They're all looking down, staring at their phones, and the odd comment, but it is a huge distraction. And the third reason is around the harmful effects that cell phones can bring and disruptions to a school, because of course many of the content is created outside of school, and we can't control that, but when it's shared within a school environment, then that causes us issues.
Right, so in respect of that, in the board's statement to parents, it says some students are creating or sharing content that is harmful or incites others to do something inappropriate. What do you mean by that? What things have you seen?
Well, I mean, you've only got to look at some of the examples on TikTok. There are plenty of things that are insightful for students to do that are either inappropriate or unwise. The other day...
Or bullying, Ross, to be absolutely frank, bullying behaviour?
Yep, bullying as well. We've also had people do things such as airdrop a picture in the middle of a middle of a lunchtime queue just for a laugh. And of course that is bullying, and that causes us concern. So our priority is, of course, to make sure that our environment as students can get on with learning and enjoy their time at school.
Ross, when you say airdrop a picture, do you mean a picture that would embarrass the person in it and spread it widely?
Yeah. So and in this particular case, this student didn't think about the consequences. He just did it, and so a couple of our senior students registered their concern, and we were able to deal with the matter. But I mean, that's one very simple example. I mean, particularly for 13, 14, and 15-year-olds, social media is a minefield. And
so you are telling them phone off in your bag, right? Not in your pocket. If you're seen using it, we'll take it. If you refuse to hand it over, then it becomes a pastoral matter, so it gets knocked up the food chain. Year 13 students, though, will be allowed discreet use of cell phones.
Yep.
Why?
Because we have a huge number of our senior students, and particularly our Year 13s, involved in our student leadership program. We've got a student exec. There are 13 of those, and then each of those 13 lead various committees, and there are 6 to 8 students on the committees, plus house exec, and all of them do a lot of organisation and reach out to each other using particularly social media or Instagram, and so we felt like for our Year 13s, we need to have that available because we didn't want to restrict their great work within the school.
Really appreciate your time, Ross. That's Ross Priest, who is the Ashburton College principal there from next year when they're bringing in that policy, 2023. Pretty much a ban except for Year 13 students. It is 23 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program. What do you make of Ashburton College's new policy on cell phones? Basically, off and in your bag. If it's seen, staff will confiscate it. If you won't give up the phone, it's going to be escalated. What does your school do? Would you like to see students leave their phones at home? Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz. And our email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time to go to the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
Police are investigating a stabbing at Bexley Park in Christchurch that has left a man in a critical condition. Detective Inspector Nicola Reeves told Checkpoint that eyewitnesses to the incident saw a man in high-vis assaulting the victim and described hearing raised voices. She says the assailant then left the scene in a small white car, accompanied by a woman wearing a white dress, at around 5:10 yesterday morning. The Green Party is worried Labour's proposal to speed up the consenting process will come at the expense of the environment. 2 bills to replace the Resource Management Act have been introduced to Parliament. The Greens Environment spokesperson Eugenie Sage says the government's solution falls short. The chief executive of NetSafe says it will take more than improving police processes to help victims of fraud. The Independent Police Conduct Authority has found major failings in the way police are responding to the growing number of fraud complaints. Donald Trump is expected to announce tomorrow that he is running for the US presidency again. Nearly a week after the midterm elections, the battle for the House of Representatives is still undecided. And the number of humans in the world is poised to reach 8 billion later today. That's according to UN figures and projections, which show the human population is growing by about 2 people a second, which is just under 200,000 babies a day. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Wellington, State Highway 2 at Melling. Southbound, a breakdown is blocking the left lane just south of the Melling lights. Also in Wellington, the Vic Tunnel will be closed tonight from 9 for maintenance. More closures on Auckland's motorways tonight, including the northbound Waterview Tunnel from 9 and State Highway 16 northbound between Great North Road and the Apatu Road from 10 p.m. Our next news headlines and traffic is at 5:40.
I wonder if we reached the 8 billionth baby while you were reading the traffic.
I bet. Pop, pop. Boom, boom. There they are.
Imagine
Jack and Stella. You know, what do you think? Or Ndugu and Bronwyn.
In the millennium, we sort of knew who was the first baby born in New Zealand. Who's the 8 billionth baby?
Bit of a competition there.
Blows my mind. Thank you. The Black Caps have named their squad for the home series against India, which starts this week, and there are a couple of notable omissions. We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. OK, who is missing from the T20 and ODI series, and who is back?
Veteran opening batter Martin Guptill has been dropped from this series, so that's potentially ending a 13-year career for the 36-year-old. He would be in line for his 4th World Cup next year, but that position is in doubt for this series, because coach Gary Stead has mentioned that this team that he's picked is actually a team that he's looking to the future. So this is Finn Allen would be taking Martin Guptill's spot. Again, this is somebody who we saw at the World Cup T20 competition in Australia recently. Good strike rate and has that aggressive style of batting that the Black Caps have been missing. But Gary Stead has mentioned that just because Martin Guptill isn't in this series doesn't mean he's necessarily not going to make it to the World Cup in India next year. But it does sort of put a line under a batter who maybe has had limited contributions in recent times. He missing out on this series, he does just miss out on making 200 international appearances for New Zealand. So he's been around a while and he's like the 3rd highest scorer in the ODI format, and New Zealand's highest scorer in the T20 format. So he has been somebody who has made a contribution and is, I guess, still in New Zealand cricket's mind. But they are very much looking forward to that future and who they can bring through next. Another big name that's missing is Trent Boult. This is a bowler, a different situation. Trent Boult stepped away from his national contract with New Zealand a couple of months ago, wanting to spend a bit more time with the family and sort of have a few more options about when he made himself available. He was apparently available for the series, but Gary Stead said that they were putting priority on players who did have those central or domestic contracts. This argument falls over a little bit though, because Jimmy Neesham, all-rounder Jimmy Neesham, he's been included in this competition against India. So he doesn't have a central or domestic contract. He's somebody who turned down a central contract, and New Zealand cricket is saying this is a point of difference between Boult and Neesham. But coming back in, because Boult's not there, this brings in Adam Milne. He's in line to play his first ODI since 2017.
Okay. And another New Zealand women's team has reached a World Cup final.
That's right. The Kiwi Ferns are into the Rugby League World Cup final. This morning they had a bit of a shaky start against England in their semi-final, managed to pull through for a 20-6 win, which puts them into the final against the Jillaroos. So that's on Sunday. This Jillaroos side has been quite dominant. They've kept 3 teams to 0 points and have scored 250 of their own. So they're on a bit of a roll. So the New Zealand coach is saying that the Jillaroos are the favourites, hot favourites, but we're going to have to get up quite early in the morning, 2:15 Sunday morning, to figure out if he's right.
The producer will be up there at 2 o'clock with the popcorn and a coffee, probably.
Yeah, but it is quite a quick turnaround. 5 days for them between their semi-final and their final. This is one of these strange double-header situations, which means that they have to play before the men's final for their World Cup. So maybe that's not something that would happen these days. After we've seen with the rugby, maybe they'll rethink that for the next World Cup.
Yeah, so true. Thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid there with sport. Fewer people are expected to join in the shopping Olympics that is Black Friday as concern grows about the rising cost of living. That's according to a survey from Price Spy, a New Zealand price comparison website. Black Friday is an American tradition with enormous sales the day after Thanksgiving. But here it's kind of morphed into more of a marathon week with retailers apparently offering cut price deals. Kiwi spent more than $248 million in the shopping frenzy last year. But with inflation at record levels, consumers feeling a little dark on the deals. Well, joining us now is tech commentator for Price Spy, Jordan Tinney. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Lisa. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. You've surveyed people's intentions for Black Friday, and what does that show?
It shows that 3 out of 5 Kiwis have previously purchased on Black Friday, which kind of reflects that massive amount made last year. You know, $248 million is no small amount, especially for the start of the Christmas season. And so it's reflected in the fact that people are out there shopping when Black Friday happens. And consumer purchase interest is actually at an all-time high once Black Friday actually rolls around. And I wonder if it's because it kind of leads into this, very big seasonal promotion. We've actually just had Singles Day last week, which is then followed by Black Friday, which is then followed by Christmas, and it goes on from there. It actually doesn't really stop until around maybe February, because back to school also kicks in at that time.
Yeah, it's like they're inventing days to get us out there and spending money. So I'm just wondering, because you do track prices, right? Yes. What have you been seeing in terms of rising costs and what areas are being hit the most?
Yeah, so I think at the moment, they're actually all kind of holding steady. I think it was actually reflected a lot more last year. I believe there were actually a few products which got pulled up by the Commerce Commission in regards to actually going up before sales events and then reducing in costs once the sale event kicked in, which means, you're not actually saving any money because the product just went back to its normal price and then dropped again, making it look like it had some kind of special on it, but it really didn't. But if we look at a product like the Sony WH-1000XM5 headset, really great headphones, they've actually tracked pretty steady at around 540 for the last couple of months. But before that, they were around 528, I think, a couple of months back. But before that, they were actually at 580. So I think it's kind of just watching the market. Maybe there's actually preparation coming from the brands in regards to responding to these events coming out. Maybe they're just needing to drop them down a little lower to get them ready, so to drive interest from consumers out there.
You cited headphones, right? So in terms of highest demand items, what do people try and snap up on this particular day or week?
I really always want to see changes into market interest, but it has always been headphones, monitors, and cell phones. Those are always the ones people watch. And I think that ties into Cyber Monday, actually, following Black Friday, because Cyber Monday is very consumer electronic driven. I think it drives a really high interest in those products, so people probably start looking for them a lot more and start really watching the market to see how different retailers are actually going to offer, good prices and get them to actually compete between one another, because one place could have it at one price and then another place could be lower.
In terms of inflation, though, Jordan, what things have been most hit by inflation? Is it your TV, your washing machine, your microwave, or your headphones?
It's actually the classics. 95% of our surveyors said that they noticed price increases happening across consumer goods, fuel and grocery items. So it's actually those living items that are affecting them the most. And maybe that's why we're actually seeing less interest in these promotional periods this year, because people actually just want to live instead of enjoying whatever the latest monitor or headphone is. that's in front of them, because, hey, maybe we don't need things as much as we think we do. And I really try to talk to things around like FOMO, fear of missing out. Do you actually need that thing, or do you just want it because it's on special at the moment?
Thank you for joining us, Jordan. That's Jordan Tinney, who's from Price Spy, a tech commentator. It is 27 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is, of course, time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai nei, ko Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. Infrastructure investor Infratil. That's quite hard to say those three
not
words,
for
Nona.
you. Not for you.
It's reported a strong first half profit.
That's right.
Tell us the money.
I will. Okay, so their net profit rose 51% to $557 million. Of course, it did include a gain from the sale of, I guess it was Trustpower's retail business. Rather, now it's, so that was the retail business that was Trustpower. It was sold to Mercury, and there was some proceeds there. So that's what Infratil got, I think $335 million, something like that, which is pretty good, hefty payday. Their underlying profit, they're expecting it to be somewhere between $540 million for the year ended. And of course, that won't include that gain, right? That's just straightforward. Revenue, 48% gain in that as well. All of their investments seem to do quite well, more or less. One of the things that really struck me was their CDC, which is a data center business based out of Australia. They built 4 new data centers in the 6-month period, looking to build another 4 at least in this year. And
whereabouts, do we know?
Well, they're going to be in Australia, but one is supposed to maybe be in Auckland with an announcement due any time. So I'll watch this space.
You'll be watching it for us,
I will be
Nona.
watching it, yes, indeed.
Okay, let's talk about the housing market. It continues to decline in price and sales volume. What are the latest details?
Well, we're looking at the REINZ, that's the Real Estate Institute's house price index. So it measures the changing value of residential property nationwide. That dropped 11% in October. So the median price of a property was $67,000, down from the year earlier at $825,000. A little bit more than the price gained a little bit on the September prices, but that's really because Auckland, carries a big weight in the market. If you took Auckland out of it, though, the market was down 3.4%. So the median price was rather.
Those are still chunky numbers.
Yeah,
you think,
they're huge.
Down $66,000. That's a big discount, and then it's sort of like the pantomime of house prices. Down 66. Whoa! But the price is still 800 and something.
Sure, but one of the things that's really important to note in these numbers is that the number of sales is down 35%. So there's a lot fewer sales going on. People are a little bit reluctant to sell. Investors are waiting on the sidelines. Some first-time buyers are in the market. Mostly it's owner-occupiers that are taking the weight of whatever change because they can, buying and selling in the same market. Not a big deal. Yeah. So, look, we haven't heard the end of this. We're expecting further falls. We'll see what happens.
And what numbers do you bring from the market, please?
Okay, so the top 50 index, it rose 7 points just to 11,239. The Kiwi dollar ticked up ever so slightly to 61 US cents, 91.2 Australian and 51.9 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite, that's Nona Peltier with our business news there. The Cambodian Prime Minister is tested positive for COVID after meeting and greeting world leaders, including Jacinda Ardern and US President Joe Biden at the ASEAN Summit in Phnom Penh. Ms Ardern is on a week-long Southeast Asian trip for security and regional summits with a heavy focus on trade. She's now moved on to Vietnam, and RNZ business editor Giles Beckford is on the trip. Kia ora, Giles. So COVID roulette, what's the deal with that?
Kia ora to you, Lisa. Well, given that Jacinda Ardern had reasonably close contact, although short durations with Hun Sen, she took a precautionary rat test, and that turned out negative. But she says she'll be monitoring for any symptoms. But clearly, it would be the last thing that she would want on a trip such as this to end up catching the virus. So, so far, all good, negative, and just being mindful and careful.
So, she's in Vietnam now. What is happening there?
Well, we're actually in one of the many hotels, colonial-era hotels in Hanoi. She's just been at a function hosted by Fonterra for obviously broad promotion of Fonterra products. So in particular, they've been doing bone density tests. Jacinda Ardern did not do a bone density test. She delegated that to her stunt double, Damien O'Connor, Trade Minister. He came out above average, just for everybody's information. But clearly the emphasis in this part of her trip is selling the business message. New Zealand is open for business. And the way it seems to operate and the strategy that's been worked out between government and businesses, she will open the high-level political doors and make the contacts there, should we say, grease the way, ease the way, and the businesses are then free to go in down at ground level, at market level, and do it. I've just been speaking to one exporter who says it's a great strategy, and he is actually over the moon that she's here leading the way. He says it helps no end.
So in terms of Vietnam, communist government, at times authoritarian and arguably at times close to Russia, they have quite a few tourists coming from Russia as well into their market. Is their position sort of at odds with New Zealand's?
Well, it's funny you should say, quite a few of them in town. In the hotel where we've been staying, there was actually a Russian commercial group running a presentation and seminar in just one floor above where the New Zealand businesses were gathering with the Vietnamese. Clearly, on a political and principled stage, New Zealand and Vietnam do have differences, and that was apparent not just at the moment on issues such as Russia, but going back to when they were negotiating the CPTPP, and New Zealand and others were putting particular pressure on Vietnam over labour standards, and that resulted in change. But there seems to be, judging from the meeting she had with the 4 top leaders in this country yesterday, there's a surprising amount of warmth for New Zealand. They seem to hold Jacinda Ardern in high regard. I mean, just the little touches, the byplays, the dinner went very well. So there's a connection there. Jacinda Ardern makes the comment. She says, look, we may disagree on some key issues, but we have also shared basic principles such as the need to recognise international treaties for peace and dialogue rather than confrontation and violence. And she sees that as base principles and a good reason for the two countries to get on, for New Zealand and Vietnam to get on well and to be able to cooperate, even if there are political and sometimes geopolitical differences.
So, Giles, where to next and who's on the dance card?
Well, we'll have another day in Vietnam, heading down to Ho Chi Minh City, the old Saigon. Attitudes are different there slightly, not quite as, shall we say, buttoned up as Hanoi is, given that it's the political centre of the country. Ho Chi Minh City, the old Saigon, very much the sort of more freewheeling commercial sense, more selling the New Zealand is open for business message, doing introductions for New Zealand businesses with Vietnamese counterparts. Then on to Bangkok at the end of the week where APEC is being held. And as you say, who's on the dance card? The expectation is that there will be a bilateral meeting, a one-on-one with the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping. Jacinda Ardern is not building that one up yet. She's being a little bit reluctant, saying, let's just wait till we've got that finalised. Also likely that she'll meet Kamala Harris, the US Vice President. They're talking about a poolside meeting there, which is one of those informal chats that happens at APEC. They'll be talking the big issues once again that we've seen in the G20 meeting recently, that we've seen in the East Asia Summit. China, South China Sea, North Korea, Ukraine. None of these things go away and leaders don't miss an opportunity to talk about them. But also there are the broader sort of trade issues about how trade is encouraged, facilitated in this part of the world. That will be there. Whole part of New Zealand business leaders will be attending APEC, the business side of APEC as well. So this is where politics and business combines and attempts to make progress.
Thank you, Giles. We know you've got good bones. No need for a test for Giles Beckford joining us live there from Vietnam. It is 17 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Do get in touch. Price of groceries is something that's on your mind. And also cell phone policies at schools. A lot of you getting in touch about that. 2101 on text. You can talk to us about anything that's on your mind today, not just those two topics. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Evie is standing by with the headlines. Ana ia Evie, mena pita pita kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. Christchurch police say they've heard from eyewitnesses to the stabbing at Bexley Reserve yesterday. Detective Inspector Nicola Reeves told Checkpoint the couple were walking near the entrance to the park when they heard raised voices and saw a man attacking another man. She says they saw the man get into a small white car which left on Pages Road. A law professor says without an extradition treaty, it would be almost impossible to bring back to New Zealand a woman linked to the discovery of the bodies of 2 children found in suitcases left in an Auckland storage unit. South Korea's Yonhap news agency is reporting the country's Justice Ministry plans to return the woman to New Zealand within 30 days. The Israeli Defence Minister says Israel won't cooperate with any external investigation into the killing of the Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. He says it's a mistake for the US to investigate the death. The Palestinian-American reporter was fatally shot in May while covering an Israeli raid on the West Bank, despite wearing a flak jacket marked press. And 4 taonga have been returned by Auckland Museum to the Indigenous Australian community they originally came from after 2 years of negotiations. A ceremony was held this morning to return an adze, an axe and 2 boomerang to the Warramungu people of the Northern Territory. That's the headlines. Looking at traffic on State Highway 76 at Addington and Canterbury, a crash is blocking the left eastbound lane and queues are building. Meanwhile, in Wellington, the Mount Vic Tunnel will be closed tonight from 9 for maintenance. And on Auckland's motorways tonight, the northbound Waterview Tunnel will be closed from 9 p.m. and on State Highway 16 northbound between Great North Road and Te Autatu Road, that will also be closed from 10 o'clock. Our next news and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Thanks, Evie. I was just mesmerised deep in some of this feedback from listeners about cell phones in schools. I'm quite shocked with some of it, actually. A teacher has got in touch to say, I'm a teacher and staff are pulling their hair out over social media distractions in class and around school. We have a heavily policed culture at our school, but we're getting close to a ban and welcome the schools who have already gone this far. I myself had an incident recently where teenage girls were airdropping me inappropriate content as a means of provocation. I would then be filmed and posted if I reacted. Ban TikTok, they say. This is not uncommon, and I have many colleagues, especially male teachers, suffering this abuse with inappropriate material. It places us in a very difficult and awkward position while teaching. That is from a Christchurch school teacher. Alex has got in touch. I'm a mother of a 14-year-old daughter. Her school, Wellington East Girls, allows phones in class. I can see from our shared app she is listening to Spotify most days, and she needs her phone whilst travelling to and from school for safety, but certainly doesn't need it in class. They should be banned from classrooms. Another says our kids are at Motueka High School. Doesn't seem to be any restrictions to student phone use. Definitely no restrictions outside of class time. Would like to see some so kids can have more real interactions. Yeah.
So we've got 2 kids and they're not allowed a smartphone till they're 15.
Yeah.
Boom, bottom line. And we don't care what anyone else is doing. Like it does start at home. You've got to, as an adult, you've got to put your own cell phone down and look at that. And of course, leave it to teenagers to weaponise smartphones, of course.
It was interesting, the principal saying, take a look at a restaurant and find an adult who doesn't have their phone that's on the table or checking it. As you say, we are all, addicted? Is that the right word?
We are.
Yeah, interesting. Let us know your thoughts, 2101, or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. If you're out for a meal at a restaurant or somewhere, do you have a policy about that? Do you keep your phone in your bag? Do you check it when you're talking to people or meeting for coffee? Where's the line in the sand? I'm interested in your thoughts. What is proper etiquette? Police have been criticised for the way they're responding to the growing number of fraud complaints. The Independent Police Conduct Authority says there are major failings in the way police act and believe there needs to be a fundamental overhaul of their processes. Kirsty Frame has the story.
More people are victims of fraud than any other crime, making up about 8% of all New Zealand adults. It's costing them around $20 and $30 million each year. Financial Services Complaints Chief Executive Susan Taylor says it's a growing and devastating issue.
They are very distressed because they've lost, in some cases it might only be a few $1,000s, but to that person that is a lot of money, or it can be, we've seen frauds between $50,000 and $100,000.
But police aren't taking the issue as seriously as they need to, according to the IPCA. The watchdog received more than 50 complaints concerning handling of fraud cases and has found police are falling short. They aren't prioritising investigations, have inadequate training and lack of victim focus. Data suggests around 70 fraud offences are brought to police each day, but only 60 are correctly recorded in their system. Even then, the crimes are being downgraded to civil disputes or minor offences. IPCA Chair Judge Colin Doherty says there are many reasons fraud is underreported, and police are adding to that.
Many people thinking that it's not worth complaining about. Some people are embarrassed at being scammed, or a whole host of reasons, but we think one of those is that people are of the view that complaining to the police doesn't help or doesn't bring appropriate action.
In one example, a caravan sales scammer banked $150,000 from several different victims. 19 complaints were made to police, several of which were considered a civil matter. 2 weren't recorded in the police database, and only 1 resulted in prosecution. Police Minister Chris Hipkins hasn't had the chance to read the report, but says complacency is an issue.
Fraud's an area I think we need to take more seriously as a country, and police I think acknowledge that as well. I've had some conversations, in the short time that I've been in the role with both police and the Serious Fraud Office about the fact that actually more proactive responses to fraud, more proactive responses to identifying fraud would be a good thing.
The IPCA wants a fundamental overhaul of the processes for recording and investigating fraud. NetSafe Chief Executive Brent Carey says the private and public sector have a role to play alongside police.
So we need to be joining up the dots and getting clearer around the scale of this fraud problem. We have to identify common patterns, and we need to share intel. And mostly we need to make sure that there's no wrong door for people.
Brent Carey says a national anti-scam centre, which is being proposed in Australia, could take the load off police. Police will consider the recommendations from the IPCA and have been undergoing an internal review of its processes.
The Resource Management Act is one step closer to the scrap heap. The government is repealing the regulatory quagmire and replacing it with 3 proposed laws, 2 of which have been introduced to Parliament today. It's promising the system it wants to replace the RMA with would be quicker, cheaper and easier for users. Here's our political reporter Katie Scotcher.
The Resource Management Act, one of New Zealand's most complex laws that's disliked by pretty much everyone.
Everyone's frustrated. Environmentalists, developers, councils, farmers, home builders.
Since its introduction more than 3 decades ago, the RMA has been tweaked thousands of times. But the 900-page law is now moving closer to the shredder, with the government unveiling its proposed replacement.
So today's the day.
Environment Minister David Parker says under the government's RMA redesign, each region would be required to produce just one strategy for land use and resources, rather than the more than 100 district and regional plans currently in place. A long-term strategy setting expectations of how each region is expected to develop over time would also be created in each area. A regional committee made up of at least 6 people, 2 or more of whom must be appointed by local Māori, would have the job of pulling those plans together.
What this really boils down to is reducing costs, times and complexity for everyone but also achieving better environmental outcomes.
David Parker says more projects would be able to go ahead without a resource consent, saving developers, infrastructure companies and businesses millions of dollars. New standards would instead provide off-the-shelf planning for projects like housing that often require consents. He's also promising councils' processing times would be much speedier too.
Councils have responsibility to control the efficiency of their own planning departments. Those planning departments are monopolies. Monopolies need to be subject to either regulatory or political control. We can't do that from central government. We will be helping local government tame their planning departments.
But Acting Prime Minister Grant Robertson says it'll take a decade before the new resource management system is fully implemented.
We're asking here for the most significant adjustment in our planning system in 3 decades. You cannot expect that to happen overnight.
National leader Christopher Luxon is questioning that time frame.
John F. Kennedy said, well, let's go to the moon. He put people on the moon in 9.5 years, so it doesn't need to take 10 years to do this.
Mr Luxon says the government's proposed RMA replacement is likely worse than the current system. ACT leader David Seymour is on the same page.
100 plans down to 15 sounds good, but if it's still based on the same principle that someone else decides what you can do in your land based on some vaguely defined goals, then we're not going to be any better off.
The Greens are unhappy too. Here's MP Eugenie Sage.
We need to have good infrastructure, livable cities, good public transport, renewable energy, but nature and climate need to be at the heart of our planning system.
The third legislative piece of the RMA reform puzzle sets out how managed retreat would work and who would pay for it. It hasn't been introduced today, and it's not certain that will happen before next year's election.
It is 5 minutes to 6, and that was Katie Scotcher. Someone's got in touch, an unbadged grocery police officer, to tell us about a pumpkin crime at the Pack and Save in New Plymouth. A crown pumpkin, $12.99, Evie, for one pumpkin.
Outrageous.
$12.99. I want someone, please, to take a picture of this and send it to us. In fact, 2101 on text, or you can email us, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. If you see any other criminal grocery prices, like a $12.99 pumpkin, we need your help. Send us the details. Where is this offending veg? The Defence Force, in collaboration with WINS, is pairing young job seekers with potential employers in dire need of staff. As part of its limited service volunteer program, a group of young people are fed, housed and trained, ready to hit the job market. After a morning running through different work scenarios using a VR headset, the trainees met with potential employers at a careers expo. Reporter Kate Green and cameraman Samuel Ralstone have more.
Today's expo is a chance for young job seekers to pitch themselves to employers and for employers to find candidates who are eager and ready for work. And the industry in Wellington with the most jobs to fill is construction. Jeremy Harp, Operations Manager at Fulton Hogan in Wairarapa.
So there's probably between 20 and 30 vacancies within the Wairarapa and Wellington region. We've got probably 6 to 8 required in Wairarapa and up to 30 in Wellington.
Danny McBain, Operations Manager for scaffolding company Acro, is short about 20 workers in Wellington and 10 in Palmerston North.
So we're just looking for young, keen people that want to learn. It doesn't really require a massive amount of skill, just a commitment to turn up to work and be willing to learn, and we can teach them everything else.
The Limited Service Volunteer Programme, LSV for short, has churned out some good prospects in the past for both Acro and Fulton Hogan. The course is a voluntary 6-week training program for 17 to 24-year-olds, with camps at Whenuapai in Auckland, Trentham in Wellington, and Burnham in Christchurch. It's totally free, run by the Defence Force, the Ministry of Social Development and the police, and funded by Work and Income. The aim is to help young people into employment or training by teaching them self-discipline, confidence and motivation. Wellington's LSV specialist, Jodie Fono, says the course is a game changer.
They do live on site for the full 6 weeks. It's free, it's voluntary, fed, clothed, housed and provided with a raft of opportunities, not just employment related, but learning pathways for themselves as well, and those basic life skills for our young people too.
The course is determined to move with the times. Today, the group sat their site-safe qualification, a requirement to work on a construction site, through a VR headset. They can also be immersed in different jobs, such as fruit picking and construction. Jodie Fornell says it's a platform most young people are used to.
Why not, bring it to them? I think that's a big thing as well, is removing barriers, them trying to get to a half-day course or a full-day course. Let's just bring it to them, get them, qualified, present them in front of an employer, and, magic happens.
Queenie Nichols from Hastings completed 4 weeks of the August course, which finished prematurely due to COVID. The 18-year-old is back to finish it off and has just passed her sight-safe certificate via VR.
I'm learning how to close my mouth and learning how to engage with other people and get along with them, because I'm not the type to I am social but not too much social, where I won't actually sit there and have a full-on conversation with you. But other than that, it's all right. It's actually pretty cool. I've learnt a lot, learning how to keep myself and stable and then more self-discipline.
Daniel Lee says a friend recommended the course to teach him discipline and maturity.
I actually learned so many things. So before I came here, I never made my bed. I never polished boots before. I never ironed my clothes before. I have my mom to do that, laundry, things like that. It's such basic things that just all adults do, but I never got the chance to do it. Maybe it's with my laziness.
The 21-year-old, who already has a job in the construction industry, says LSV is teaching him lifelong skills.
We're just put in this environment where everyone is doing it together, and I think that doing it as a team is also very encouraging, and it really puts some discipline in you, because you don't want to be focusing on how to make your bed when you're trying to go to work, right?
The Trentham course runs for another 3 weeks.
You can check out the video version of that story online. After 6, a new trial for a temporary contraceptive. And this one is for men. It could be a game changer.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening. I'm Evie Ashton. The police investigating the brutal stabbing of a dog walker in Christchurch have spoken to eyewitnesses and have a description of the man's attacker. Thought to be in his 20s, he was wearing an orange high-vis top, hat and shorts. He was with a woman in a long white clothing, and the police say the pair are possibly of Māori or Pasifika descent. Detective Inspector Nicola Reeves told Checkpoint a couple walking near the entrance to Bexley Park early yesterday morning saw what happened.
They have described hearing what they've called raised voices, sounding like an argument. They have looked in that direction and they have seen a man assaulting our victim, and then the man, and he's accompanied by a woman, and they have got in a small white car and they have left.
Nicola Reeves says the witnesses didn't see a weapon. The Green Party is worried Labour's proposal to speed up the resource consenting process will come at the expense of the environment. 2 bills replacing the Resource Management Act were introduced to Parliament this afternoon. The Greens Environment spokesperson Eugenie Sage says the RMA needs urgent reform, but the government's solution falls short.
There's not enough attention to nature and the climate. We need to have good infrastructure, livable cities, good public transport, renewable energy, but nature and climate need to be at the heart of our planning system.
Eugenie Sage says the legislation must be improved during the Select Committee process. The International Monetary Fund says the global economic outlook is gloomier than it was a month ago. In a blog written for G20 leaders, it says the economic landscape is even more uncertain, as William Denslow reports.
The IMF says that G20 industrialised nations face a number of downside risks and that weakening economic indicators point to challenges ahead. Last month, the IMF downgraded its global growth forecast for 2023 from 2.9% to 2.7%. The IMF cites high inflation, supply chain and food insecurity fuelled by the war in Ukraine and weak growth in China as contributing factors. The body also warns that severe weather events and Europe's energy crisis could harm growth. The IMF says this confluence of issues has led to an unusually uncertain current policy environment.
In the US midterm elections, the Democratic Party now appears to have won the Arizona governorship. CNN project Katie Hobbs will defeat the Republican Party candidate Carrie Lake, who's a prominent defender of Donald Trump's denial of the 2020 election result. She had vowed that if elected, she'd ban mail-in voting, which conspiracy theorists claim is vulnerable to fraud. The closely fought race between Ms. Hobbs and Ms. Lake has been regarded as highly significant because Arizona is a battleground state expected to play a pivotal role in the 2024 presidential election. A corrections psychiatric advisor says Paul Tainui struggled to accept responsibility for his first murder. Tainui raped and murdered Kimberly Schroeder in 1994. While on life parole in 2018, he murdered Nicole Tuxford, whose death is now the subject of an inquest. Nick Wilson told the court in Christchurch today that because of Tainui's inability to accept what he did, he was denied parole 3 times before being granted it in 2010.
Mr Tainui was said in the 2009 report to the board to be more open about his responsibility for the rape of Ms Schroeder and her distress at his actions, but to still not understand why he murdered her.
Nick Wilson says psychologists also told the parole board Tainui's low-risk status might escalate if he was in a challenging situation. Turkish and Syrian Kurdish groups are denying any role in a bomb blast in Istanbul that killed 6 people and wounded 80 others. 46 people have been detained, including a woman suspected of planting the bomb. The BBC's Anna Foster reports from Istanbul.
The suspect has been named as Ahlam al-Bashir, a Syrian national. CCTV footage from the scene of the attack shows a woman sitting on a bench on Istiklal Street for 40 minutes. She walks away shortly before a bag left under the seat explodes. Dozens of people have been detained as part of the police inquiry. It's the first major attack in Istanbul in 5 years and comes ahead of elections in Turkey due next June.
A house in Tauranga at the centre of a case of alleged asylum fraud was raided by immigration authorities in 2020. Nurul Nur Asman, who worked as an interpreter, is on trial after pleading not guilty to 5 charges of submitting false or misleading information to a refugee status officer. Lucy Sia reports from the Auckland District Court.
Crown witness Kadek Sawadika, who came to New Zealand on a visitor's visa, says he was living in the Cameron Road house with 13 other migrants. He told the jury Ms Noor Asman encouraged him and others in the house to claim asylum as a way of getting a work permit, and he paid her to write a story for his false asylum claim. In cross-examination, Mr Sawadika said he was interviewed when the house was raided, but can recall no details of the interview.
And a law professor says without an extradition treaty, it would be almost impossible to bring back to New Zealand a woman linked to the discovery of the 2 children's bodies. The remains were found in suitcases left in an Auckland storage unit. South Korea's Yonhap news agency is reporting the country's Justice Ministry plans to return the 42-year-old New Zealand woman of Korean descent within 30 days. University of Canterbury law professor Neil Boyster says that without a treaty, extradition, if possible, can take up to a decade. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, social media continues its antisocial behaviour as Meta becomes the latest tech giant to axe thousands of jobs. Gaming guru Sir Ian Livingston tells us about a life in video games. We look at island diets, eating only what you can grow and catch around you. And why aren't more women fly fishing? It's all on Nights with Karen Hay after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. For Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Isolated thunderstorms in western Northland tomorrow afternoon and evening. From Waikato to Manawatu, also Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and the Central High Country. Partly cloudy with a few afternoon and evening showers, mainly inland. Some heavy with isolated thunderstorms tomorrow. From Horowhenua to Wellington and also for Waded Upper, fine. However, isolated showers about the ranges today, spreading to Waded Upper tomorrow with possible thunderstorms. Nelson, Marlborough, Bulla, Westland, also Canterbury, north of Timaru. Fine today apart from a few showers in southern Westland, increasing a high cloud tomorrow with a few showers about the ranges. For southern Canterbury, for Otago and also for Southland, high cloud increasing this afternoon and occasional rain developing. Rain could be briefly heavy tomorrow afternoon or evening. In Fiordland, occasional rain, mainly about the fjords today. And for Kohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy, rain at times. It's 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Ngā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Some residents in eastern Christchurch are changing the way they use their local park after a brutal stabbing of a man out walking his dog near the popular park. The man remains in a critical condition in hospital as police continue to investigate the assault. But the attack in the suburb of Bexley has prompted some locals to change or rethink their behaviour. Adam Burns reports.
Vivian McRobert walks around Bexley Park every day, mostly with a group of friends, and says she has never felt unsafe. This morning, the group decided to walk their dogs around the dog park at a later time. Ms McRobert says yesterday's attack was disturbing, but not necessarily representative of the neighbourhood.
All areas have that. You've always got, no matter where you live, you're going to have it. Just because of where we are, they make a bigger deal about it. And I've been living this way for a long time. I've never felt unsafe. Then you get bad people whatever area you're in.
Jasmine Keats also walks the park often as it borders the street she lives on. She says the attack had given her an unpleasant feeling when walking Pages Road.
While I was walking down that end, I turned around a couple of times just to make sure that there was no one there. I don't know. It just gave me a bit of a ick.
Ms Keats will now only walk through the park in daylight hours.
I mean, as long as I'm on the street, I probably would, but if I'm going to walk through here, it'll be during the day when there's light so that I can see everywhere around me.
John Gregg lives opposite the park and says the attack has left him feeling nervous. He says the area is in constant use by the community.
Sunday there was heaps of kids over there on the swings, so there's a lot of people who walk their dogs.
Another local resident, James Coyer, says he uses the park often, even at night time. He says yesterday's attack has affected his comfort levels.
I used to go like that. I used to do a lot of walking around in here. Especially at night. I used to go down there, go right around. I used to go right around and come back around in here.
Even at night time, mate?
Yeah, night time. I used to, but since I had that, I better not do anything like that.
City Councillor Yanni Johansson says there's been growing safety concerns around parts of the city. He says there were a number of underlying factors.
The rising inequity and inequality that's occurring, the lack of spaces for people that need, treatment for different things, whether it's alcohol and drug or the huge pressure on mental health services in the city. Christchurch has been through an amazing amount of disaster and tragedy over the last decade.
Detective Inspector Nicola Reeves says police are interested in talking to a man and woman seen leaving the scene in a small white vehicle near the park entrance shortly after 5 o'clock yesterday morning.
And that was Adam Burns reporting. A sperm-stopping gel injected into the tubes that transport it around the body could be a game changer when it comes to temporary male contraceptive. In a world first, the procedure, dubbed the reversible vasectomy, is being trialled by researchers at the Epworth Freemasons Hospital in Melbourne. 25 men who have the gel injection will be tracked over 3 years to see how effective the procedure is. The lead investigator, urologist, Professor Nathan Lorenzchuk, explains.
So most people would appreciate how a standard vasectomy works, which is a very popular form of contraception in both New Zealand and Australia. And effectively, what a vasectomy does is disrupt the tube, the vas deferens, which goes from the testicle to the outside world. And by way of doing this, renders a male permanently, if you like, infertile. Now, the idea here is that we're doing a temporary vasectomy, which instead of removing part of that tube, we in fact inject hydrogel within that tube, which sets and stays hopefully for a specified period of time, such that if the male decide to change their mind, then indeed this would become a temporary form of contraception rather than a permanent one.
So many questions, Nathan. So the short version of it is you are blocking the sperm's access way out using this gel.
Correct.
What is this gel and what does it normally get used for?
Well, look, hydrogels are used a lot in medicine. They've been particularly used in areas of plastic surgery, and in fact in urology we use them, for example, to create a barrier between the prostate and the rectum when we're doing radiation. The technology's improved over the last decade. These sort of gels are injected in quite a liquefied form, but then they tend to firm up and become more, I guess, closer to superglue concentration. But they're fairly inert to the body, but also over time the body has the natural ability to dissolve these gels such that that's why this can become a temporary procedure.
So in terms of the placement of the gel with this, well, let's call it a temporary vasectomy, do you inject it in?
Indeed, we do. So we have to locate the vas deferens, the tube that goes from the testicle and out through the scrotum and up into the outside world. And indeed, that is done in a similar fashion to doing a vasectomy. We then insert a needle, if you like, into the vas deferens or a cannula. Currently, it's being done under general anaesthetic in our trials here in Melbourne, in Australia. But hopefully, in the larger marketplace, it would just be a fairly straightforward procedure done under local anaesthetic in the doctor's office rather than having to even go to a hospital.
You talked about it dissolving. Is that the reason it's not permanent? Do you have to wait for it to wear off, or is there a way to remove it or speed that process up if you change your mind or you're ready to have kids?
So that's a good question. It dissolves because it has a natural lifespan due to the body's immune system and enzymatic makeup. The gel is also made to not be permanent, if you like. Otherwise, we'd just use super glue, I suppose. But the idea is that the gel is fairly inert and will have a certain lifespan. In terms of reversing it, if someone was to change their mind, they would immediately have access to IVF techniques that are available now to extract sperm. So we believe it is reversible in that sense. But to your other point, I think the next phase in research would be to develop an antidote, if you like, or something that could be injected earlier to dissolve it. And remembering that you only need really one side to dissolve to render someone fertile again. So it's sort of winner takes all. You have to have either both sides blocked, because if one side is not blocked, that would be enough to render a man fertile again.
Okay, so sperm production still happens. Where does it go when it's blocked off like that?
Well, just in the same way that when men have a vasectomy, the sperm production persists for 5 to 10 years at least, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. The sperm is just resorbed by the body.
How many men are queuing up for this, right? Because potentially it's a game changer and shares the responsibility for contraceptive. So is there a queue to be part of the trial?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And indeed, we were somewhat surprised at how overwhelming the response has been. Every time we open up our recruitment portal, we have to shut it down again. The overwhelming feeling is that a lot of men feel it's about time there was another option available. I certainly believe their partners would be happier that there's other options available. And I also think that ultimately this puts men in the driver's seat, so to speak, so that particularly for single men, they can have a bit more certainty and control. And within a couple, the burden no longer falls on the female partner to take care of these issues as well. So I think there is, as we know, there's no male contraceptive pill. There's really nothing between condoms and vasectomy as far as male contraception goes. So I think there's a very big space for this. And although immediately it may not be obvious, I think there are a lot of men and couples who would actually indeed take this up.
And that is Professor Nathan Lorenzchuk. Interesting study. Kiwi reinforcements have arrived in Australia today to help rescuers in flood-stricken New South Wales. The flooding situation is worsening, with water levels rising faster than expected. Authorities say they're dealing with the biggest flood operation in the state's history. The ABC's Mary Lloyd reports.
Philippa Childs from Cairo was operating on only a few hours' sleep when she returned today to the soft feed shop she runs with her partner.
It's, I guess, a bit worse than we imagined when we left last night. So what's actually happened, a lot of the feed has expanded in the bag and blown out the bag. So there's stock feed all over the floor and mud, and actually smells like quite good. It smells a bit like really sweet stock feed, but I'm sure by this afternoon it will start to smell pretty bad.
They had just renovated and moved into new premises. Not only have they lost a lot of stock, but also trading days, as it'll take a while to clean up.
We had close to a metre of water coming through last night at about 1:30 a.m. And so basically everything's lost in there. We had great effort from the community. Everybody came in and helped. The community really came together, which was awesome. And we've put everything up as high as we could, but it just was so underestimated how fast it would come up and how high it would come up. Nobody predicted it. I mean, we were talking to the SES and everybody all afternoon, and nobody assumed it would come up this high, and I guess it just really shocked everybody. So, yeah.
As the flood situation once again worsens in the Lachlan Valley, which runs through central western New South Wales, some amazing stories of survival are emerging. In Eugowra, near Forbes, there have been more than 100 rescues, including from rooftops. The town only has a population of 700. Janet Noble's house on the main street was swept off its foundations yesterday morning, leaving her stranded inside as floodwaters rose around her.
Well, it got up to my chest, I'd say. I don't know. I didn't have much time to think. I was just hanging on for dear life and hoping for the best. And I thought, oh, this is it. I've had it. I couldn't get out. The stream was just a torrent. You couldn't possibly swim against it. It was freezing cold because I'd been standing there for hours.
New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet says state emergency services have had 900 requests for assistance in the past 24 hours and carried out 222 flood rescues. He doesn't see the pressure on them letting up soon.
We do expect more heavy rainfall over the weekend. It's not taking much rain to cause flash flooding anywhere across our state. It's only taking between 100 and 150 mils of rainfall overnight, and we will have flash flooding, and that can come up very, very quickly.
Rory Nathan, a professor of hydrology and water resources at the University of Melbourne, says the modelling that's been used in the past to estimate maximum rainfall is now out of date because of climate change.
Our current estimates of these extreme rainfalls are based on historical rainfalls over the last sort of 50, 60 years. With a warming world, those estimates are now increasingly irrelevant to what the future that we're facing.
He expects that if the planet continues on its current warming trajectory, maximum rainfalls could be as much as 38% higher than currently estimated. And to cope with that, he wants to see not just bigger dams, but also moving people off floodplains.
It's 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. US President Joe Biden is playing down fears of new hostilities with China. He's just come out of his first face-to-face talks with Xi Jinping since he was elected. After more than 3 hours of discussions, the White House said Mr Biden had told President Xi that the US would continue to compete vigorously with China, but this shouldn't veer into conflict. CNN's Phil Mattingly reports.
On the tarmac of the island international airport, world leaders are welcomed in Balinese style. Anthony Albanese's RAAF jet pulling up alongside the United States Air Force One before the Prime Minister pulled out a special invitation.
I will be having a bilateral meeting with Chinese President Xi.
Meetings between world leaders at summits such as the G20 here in Indonesia are commonplace. It's often the only time in a year that leaders get to see each other. But with China, it's different. Anthony Albanese will become the first Australian Prime Minister since Malcolm Turnbull in 2016 to hold formal talks with the Chinese president.
We need to cooperate with China where we can. We'll disagree where we must.
The Chinese government had kept Australia guessing on whether such a meeting would take place. And it begs the question, how will the Prime Minister measure the success of the talks?
Having the meeting is a successful outcome because for 6 years we have not had any dialogue. And it is not in Australia's interest to not have dialogue with our major trading partner.
6 years ago, the relationship was very different. One of the final acts of the Turnbull government was to block Chinese telco Huawei from any role in the development of Australia's 5G network. And Beijing has since slapped damaging trade tariffs on a range of Australian products. China's taken issue with Australia's participation in freedom of navigation exercises in the South China Sea, while Australia's raised concerns about human rights abuses and freedom of the press under President Xi.
I'm sure that Prime Minister Albanese and President Xi have a range of things to talk about.
Nick Coyle is hoping the plight of his partner, Chung Lai, is on the agenda when the two leaders meet. The Australian journalist has been behind bars in Beijing for 2 years, accused of providing state secrets to foreigners.
The government have done a great job in advocating for her, and I'm sure they'll continue to do that. And all I hope for, all her family hopes for, is a compassionate and speedy resolution.
Just how frank the Prime Minister is during his meeting remains to be seen. And whether he takes any lead from the US President also isn't clear. Joe Biden meeting President Xi on Monday evening. The leaders of the two world superpowers meeting for 3 hours.
We share responsibility, in my view, to show that China and the United States can manage our differences, prevent competition from becoming anything ever near conflict.
President Biden stressing, as Anthony Albanese has, that communication is key.
President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine is moving step by step towards liberating all occupied territories. He was greeted by flag-waving crowds on a surprise visit to Kherson, only days after Russian troops withdrew from the city. James Waterhouse reports.
After everything Kherson's main square has seen, today was more than just a change in the wind. Until just weeks ago, the sight of Ukraine's leader here would have been difficult to imagine. This regional capital is back in its control. He was asked whether it was the beginning of the end of this war.
We are going forward. We're ready for peace, but our peace for our country is all our country, all our territory. We respect the law and respect sovereignty of all the countries, but now we are speaking about our countries.
An undeniable moment in this war. President Zelensky appearing in the heart of Kherson. That was thought to be in firm Russian control. He has described this as the beginning of the end of the war, and few people here will disagree with that. Ukraine's leader knows there's a lot of fighting and negotiating before that point. For now, Kherson feels like a city emerging from its own lockdown. One place which didn't shut was this grocery shop, run by Valentina and Valentina. We're not sure if it's better because we're just simple people, she says. The most important thing is that we're still alive. So this is a Russian brand of wafer biscuit. And it's kind of a strange legacy of occupation where Valentina's shop is full of stock from Russia. At one point they were forced to accept the Russian ruble, but no more.
They usually paid, but they still carried weapons, which was very scary. My knees were shaking from fear, but I had to keep working. It was so hard. Even now I want to cry.
Some Russian traces are more obvious than others. This used to be the headquarters used by Moscow-installed politicians. It's claimed some people were tortured here if they didn't follow the rules. Ukraine is desperate to achieve peace on its own terms. It is still the underdog, but what's got it this far is knowing what it's fighting for.
Staying in Ukraine, one 6-year-old boy from Mariupol lost both his parents in the first week of the invasion. Now, Ilya found a new home in Kiev with a loving family who plans to adopt him. CNN's Salma Abdalis has their story.
Like any 6-year-old child, Ilya's energy is endless. He wants constant attention and entertainment and craves affection from the two people who care for him most. Now we have that love, they tell me. That love that makes you a family. We did not have this baby, but our love is real. Maria and Vladimir are Ilya's legal guardians. They've been a little family for more than 6 months. And the couple plan to formally adopt him and become parents to a child orphaned by this war. The pair was forced to flee their home in the east for Kyiv because of shelling, but refused to give up on their dream of starting a family.
This was such a difficult decision to adopt during a war. Did you hesitate? Did you think maybe this is not the right time?
We had been planning to adopt for many years, he says. The war pushed us to make it happen sooner. Now we wonder, why did we ever wait? Ilya's mom was killed in Mariupol, his birthplace, She left home to find food and was struck down by shelling in the first week of war. Unaware of his wife's fate, Ilya's father went looking for her the next day, only to lose his life too. Ilya was left with neighbors, where he sheltered with strangers for weeks in a cold, dark basement. When they ran out of food, Ilya says he started to eat his toys. The newfound parents are trying to give Ilya a sense of security.
Hello. Hi.
But when we visit their home in Kyiv, we see why that's a challenge. Blackouts caused by Russia's strikes on the power grid leave the family without electricity for hours. Sometimes he gets scared, she says. He is hysterical and he'll tell me it's like being back in Mariupol, in the basement, in the darkness. During the outages, the young family try to make things normal, playing games, watching movies, anything to ease Ilya's worried mind.
Do you get afraid in the dark, Ilya?
Not anymore, he says. I know the lights will come back on. And they do. During our interview, electricity is restored and Ilya runs to switch on the lights. Ready to play again. But first, he wants to put on his Spider-Man costume. He says it makes him feel strong and brave.
What a gorgeous little man. Some more of your feedback on cell phones at school. This listener says our 13-year-old daughter was cyberbullied at school. School refused to do anything tangible about it. Now our daughter is currently seeing a clinical psychologist, along with having to receive her education via correspondence due to PTSD. Someone else got in touch to say, husband and I never have a phone anywhere near us while out for dinner, only use it in emergencies. We value our conversation. That is about all we've got time for. The Late News team's going to keep you posted and updated throughout the evening. If you missed anything from the program, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a Pōpō, and tomorrow from 5 a.m. on First Up, they talk to the New South Wales Emergency Commissioner as help arrives from New Zealand to battle the worst flooding in the state's history. Do tune in for that one, 5 a.m. tomorrow. Kia pai tōpō. Have a wonderful evening. We'll catch you back here, same time, same place.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton, them nei. The police investigating the brutal stabbing of a dog walker in Christchurch yesterday have spoken to eyewitnesses and have a description of the man's attacker. The International Monetary Fund says the global economic landscape is even more uncertain than it was a month ago. And in the US midterm elections, the Democratic Party appears to have